If you're not planting flowers and vegetables from seed, you're missing out on one of the most fun things you can do as a gardener. Today, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, demystifies the confusing language you just might find on seed packets. What do terms like days to harvest or bolting really mean? What is stratification or scarification? We revisit this chat, originally aired back in 2020 because, well, we're on summer vacation. It's episode 399 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. And we're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. Let's go. So recently I bought a packet of seeds. It was a packet of nasturtium seeds. It's a flower. It tends to bloom here in the cool season, and it's a great way to attract pollinators and beneficials. Beautiful little ground cover with big flowers. And on the instructions on the back of the packet for sowing the seeds, it says recommended 1 to 2 weeks after your average last frost date, which around here, that would probably be in March or thereabouts. But it says for mild climates, sow in fall for winter bloom. Well, we're in a mild climate and it always blooms in the cool season here, so I guess we must be in a mild climate. But then I went on the website for this particular seed manufacturer, Botanical Interests, and it had a very different definition for mild climate than what I thought. Their definition for a mild climate says it's those without freezing temperatures, generally USDA zones 10 and warmer. Here in the Sacramento Valley, we are USDA zone 9. And I always thought we were kind of mild, but I guess we're not mild. I guess only the southern tip of Florida and Southern California are considered mild climates. But this is news to me because I've never had a problem growing this during the cool season. And that raises up a whole fleet of questions about what do all these terms on the back of a seed packet really mean? For that, we bring in our official translator, retired college horticulture professor, Debbie Flower. And Debbie, if you look at seed packets, they're full of all sorts of terms that a lot of new gardeners may be totally unfamiliar with.
Yeah, there are certainly lots of words. It depends on what company you get the seed from. Some say almost nothing on the packet, and others have practically a novel. I like the novel ones.
Yes.
So, yes, there's lots of information, lots of words, lots of terminology. Horticulture, like any science or group of sciences, which horticulture really is, has its own language and definitions. So it's good to know what those words mean.
And what adds to the confusion, especially for new gardeners, I mean, local nurseries can help you out a lot when it comes to buying plants because your local independent nursery usually only carries outdoor plants for the season when they are meant to be planted in terms of flowers and vegetables. So
if it is a quality nursery, if it is a nursery that is tailored to the location, which independent nurseries certainly are, big box stores are not always.
Correct. And that brings up one anomaly to that, though, and that is the seed rack at the independent nursery. They may have seeds for any old time of the year in that rack.
Yeah, they're stocked by the seed companies, or, there's obviously a relationship between the nursery and the seed companies, and they will turn their seeds over when the seasons change, but it doesn't always mean that what's on that rack will grow at that moment.
Exactly. I mean, they're usually just going through the rack to take out the expired seed and put in fresh seed, but the varieties that they may be putting in may have very specific time frames for planting.
Right. And of course, there are gardeners who like to push the envelope and grow things in their yard that aren't necessarily known to survive in that environment. So they want to cater to those people as well. So there can be some different stuff in the seed rack.
Exactly. Well, we're going to try to make this as easy as possible. We are going to go through a glossary of common terms that you might see on a seed packet or in a plant description and give them definitions you can understand. And you could refer back to this episode whenever you have a question, because I think we're going to cover most of the terms that you might see on a seed packet or on a plant. Now, let's start with the letter A. Let's start with annuals. Okay. Maybe we should include all the variances of that. So that would be annuals, biennials, and perennials.
Okay.
Be my guest.
Annual refers to 1 year. If you have your annual checkup at the dentist, you go once a year. So annual is a plant that completes its life in 1 year. But you have to understand what completing its life means. That means it grows from a seed into a plant, it flowers, it has fruit, and produces seed and dies. It's important. The dying part is important for an annual. Many plants we have in the yard can produce flower and fruit and seed, but they don't die. Those would be perennials. Perennials live more than 2 years, and they grow from seed. They typically have a juvenile period, just like humans have a juvenile period, meaning they're unable to make offspring for several years. Fruit trees are notorious for that. You won't get fruit on a fruit tree for 5 years or more in some cases. So that's something breeders work on. They try to shorten that amount of time. But a brand new fruit plant out of the seed will not have fruits on it. Even your tomatoes will not flower and fruit the first day they come out of the seed. They have to go through their juvenile period and become an adult. Once they're an adult, they can flower and fruit. And in the case of a perennial, something that was more than 2 years before it dies, they can produce flower and fruit for many years before that death process occurs. And yes, plants do have a lifespan. They have a time in which they will die eventually. Often environmental things get in the way and kill them before that lifespan is up. But many plants, I'm thinking again of fruit trees, something like 30 years is a lifespan for a producing fruit tree. And that's not unusual. And there are others like the plants in the Rockies, the trees in the Rockies that live for thousands of years. So perennials live 2 or more years, and they can produce fruit and seed and flowers many years in a row. Then there's the biennial. Bi means 2 in Greek, and ennial refers to the annual part, the year. So a biennial completes its life in 2 years. The first year grows from seed, and it tends to have only leaves, only green parts, leaves and stems, doesn't flower, doesn't fruit. Then the second year, they sort of seem to leap out of the ground. They're much bigger usually than the first year, and they do produce their flower and fruit and seed, and then they die from that. So annuals, 1 year, biennials, 2 years, perennials, more than 2 years.
One of my favorite biennials, and that's a rather unusual category of plants, and one of my favorite biennials is the Tower of Jewels, the Echium wild pretty eye, I think is the species on that.
Yeah.
And it truly is. It's just this green little blob that looks like Cousin It from the Addams Family. And then in its second year, it produces literally a tower of jewel-like flowers. And this tower is like 4 or 5 feet tall.
It is a really spectacular plant. It is so much fun to grow. I've had people stop at the end of my driveway and point at my tower of jewels in the yard.
And the hummingbirds love it.
Yes, they do.
On a related note, also on a seed packet, you will see, especially on vegetables, days to harvest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually right next to days to emerge. And emerge refers to how long it takes for that seed to come out of the ground. Days to harvest.
The plant from the seed. There's a plant inside every seed, a baby plant. And so it's the plant that's coming out of the ground.
As opposed to a tomato worm.
To a seed.
Yes. All right. And days to harvest, I always find it amazing that they can actually pinpoint that it will take that tomato 60 days from the time you plant it to the time it'll produce fruit. I find that hard to believe.
Have you ever checked them on that?
No, I never have. That would be a good experiment.
I always find that term days to harvest rather vague because the definition that I've read says the number of days from sowing, meaning planting in the ground, or transplanting until you can harvest fruit from that plant. And so sowing is when the seed goes in the ground. Transplanting is when you take a baby plant, let's say you bought it at the nursery in a little 6-pack or a 4-inch, and you plant that in the ground. There's time between the days the seed is planted and the days that plant has taken to grow into a plant that you buy at the nursery. But they seem not to take those days into consideration. So I also have not tested them on days to harvest, if they're accurate on the seed packet. I look at it as a relative term. If this tomato is going to produce in 60 days and this tomato is going to produce in 90, I can expect fruit off of one before the other. But I don't know that they truly can pinpoint it to the day.
It would have to be planted at exactly the right time of the year, too, in order to agree with their parameters.
Yes, and weather would have to be perfect.
Yes. It's interesting in this one definition on Botanical Interests webpage about days to harvest. They say it's number of days from sowing or transplant to harvest. Well, which is it?
Right.
You're selling me seeds. Wouldn't it be sowing?
Right, exactly. But if you sow it indoors, let's say, as many people do, or if you happen to have a greenhouse in your greenhouse, and then transplant it into the garden, there will be some setback, what we commonly refer to as transplant shock. There will be some setback in the growth of that plant when you put it from the container into the ground. But I really don't think it's as many days as it takes for that plant to grow from a seed into the plant we're putting in the ground. So I agree. It's a very vague definition and a vague term.
Right. It'll just give you a ballpark idea of how long it's going to take. I mean, we can tell you that cherry tomatoes are going to ripen before a full-sized heirloom tomato.
Right.
That's all we can tell you, though. Now, another term you may come across, especially when planting vegetables, you might see the term bolting on it, and in reference to a stage that the plant is going to go through. What is bolting?
Bolting is when an edible crop produces flowers, and they refer to the edible crops like the greens, lettuce, spinach, chard, kale, things where we eat the leaves. Could also refer to root crops, beets, radishes, carrots. And bolting is when they say on the definition premature. I don't think it's premature. It's what the plant is going to do next. It's typically in response to warm temperatures and changes in day length. But what we notice the most is warm temperatures. And those plants have finished doing their green growth, and now they're going to flower. And so they're just doing what comes naturally to them. But it's a point where the chemistry inside of the plant changes, the hormones inside the plant change, and the cabbage or the lettuce or the spinach or the chard typically then taste bitter. A lot of different chemicals accumulate in the leaves, and they are not as nice to eat, not as tender and sweet. And then often these are annuals, and often they will seed and flower and die.
If you stare at a bolted plant long enough, you may notice a lot of insect activity around the flowers. And that's a good thing. And it's one reason to have a big garden to where you can leave the bolted plants in the garden, letting them flower, attracting all sorts of beneficial insects that can help you control the bad bugs.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, those are great flowers for attracting the beneficial insect. It's a great insect control strategy for the vegetable garden.
In some seed packets, you might see what are called special germination instructions. It might say to soak the seed in water for 12 to 24 hours, and that darkness can aid germination, so you want to sow at the recommended depth. And instead of being in simple English like that, it may say something along the lines of, the seed needs stratification or scarification. What do those terms mean?
Scarification is the easy one to remember, I think, because it has the word scar in it. And scarification is breaking the seed coat so that the seed can absorb water to grow. So you scar the seed coat. It maybe sounds more violent than the process really is. Sometimes with, let's say, peas or sweet peas, they'll suggest you soak the seed in warm water for 24 hours before planting. That's a method of scarification, believe it or not. It can take the water can take chemicals out of the seed that prevent it from germinating. Plants don't want their seeds to germinate as soon as they fall off of the plant. Often that's the wrong season for that plant. And if they fell off the plant and grew, they would be growing right next to each other. And so it's become an adaptation for plants to figure out a way to get something to eat them or to attach to an animal's fur or blow in the wind, in some way move away from the parent plant. So seeds of plants typically will not germinate as soon as they come off the plant. That's a bad strategy for the plant's ultimate survival over decades. So they put something in the seed that prevents it from germinating. Sometimes it's the fruit around the outside. Sometimes it's chemicals in the seed coat, which can come out with a water soaking, which is a type of scarification. Sometimes it's a very hard seed, and that needs to be worked on over time, maybe by stomach acid, if an animal were to eat it, maybe by freezing and thawing, which can work on breaking open the seed coat. Or we humans can take things like sandpaper or nail clippers and just rub into the seed coat. Typically, the seed coat in those plants that need to be scarified by rubbing, by physically breaking the seed coat, are dark in color. And so you just want to sand them or clip them until you see a lighter color underneath. You don't want to go too far in, because that will kill the baby plant that's inside, or has the potential to kill the baby plant that's inside. So scarification is breaking of the seed coat. In commercial production, they might use acid to break seed coats. And there are many recipes that you will find if you delve into scarification of seeds, many different recipes listed to break that seed coat of different species of plants. Stratification is a little harder to remember in my book anyway. It's giving the plant a moist, cold treatment so that it will be ready to germinate. So another strategy that plants use so that the seed does not germinate at the wrong time of year is to produce their seed with a not quite mature baby plant inside, or a mature baby plant that is in dormancy. Dormancy is a state where the seed will not grow, or the plant part will not grow, even if it's given good growing conditions, moisture, temperature, air, all those things that seeds need or plant parts need to grow. And so what you need to do is mimic the winter. Winter satisfies dormancy. Cold satisfies dormancy. So you want to preserve the seed so it doesn't die, and you want to give it a cold treatment. And so typically the way that's done is to take the seed, put it in a jar or a plastic bag with some sterile media. I like to use peat moss because it's got a very low pH. It's very acidic, which prevents fungus from growing. But I've seen people use other things like sand or perlite. The advantage of those is that you can often see the seed. Brown seeds kind of disappear in peat moss, but they're visible in perlite and sand. And a little bit of moisture, just like a wrung out sponge. You don't want to see puddles of water in the jar or bag. You just want the whole thing to be moist. And you put it in a cold place. A refrigerator works as a cold place. And leave it there for, if the seed packet doesn't say, I would say leave it there for 6 weeks. Or leave it there until you see roots begin to grow, which is the first thing that comes out of a seed. This is done with acorns. That's a nice one to do it with because they're nice and big, and you can check them periodically and see if the root tip has come out of that seed. And if it has, then you have to very gently plant them. I say gently because that root tip will be very brittle. If the 6 weeks has gone by and the roots have not shown and the media is still moist, then I would plant some of them, half of them maybe. They probably will germinate anyway. I would give the other half, a couple of more weeks of that moist chilling treatment. It's important they stay moist, and so you can check your bag or jar periodically to make sure the media is moist, not wet, just moist. Then plant those others. I've done it many times with many different kinds of seeds. The cold treatment really helps that plant complete its dormancy and grow.
But I would imagine one should not store seeds in the refrigerator.
One can store seeds in the refrigerator if they're dry and in their seed packets. But you wouldn't want to store seeds in the refrigerator in a moist condition. Once a seed gets wet, then it can start to grow. And if it dries out after it starts to grow, it is dead.
if you did want to store your seeds in the refrigerator, then they should be in their original packet. And then I would think maybe include a silica packet somewhere in the bag where you've got your seed packages, and then keep it in like the vegetable crisper.
The location, I think, is pretty irrelevant. However, the back of the refrigerator stays more evenly cool. Cool is fine. It's the dryness that the refrigerator provides. Refrigerators these days, I remember defrosting refrigerators and defrosting freezers, but we don't have to do that anymore because they dry themselves out. They don't build up moisture and ice inside of the refrigerator like they used to. So it's a very dry environment. So the cool, dry environment is what allows the seed to last a long time. So I put my seeds in a plastic bag that I seal. Plastic bags are not impermeable to air, so they won't, kill the seed from suffocation if that's a thing. And I've seen jars suggested like canning jars, and you put the lid on, and they're in their original seed packet and they're in the refrigerator. But any part of the refrigerator is fine. The crisper drawer is where I put seeds that I am stratifying.
This time of year, summer, you just might be wandering through your garden, wondering, where are all the ripe tomatoes? Where are the tomato flowers? Why are my tomato plants so slow to produce? That's what we're going to talk about in this week's Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, which comes out every Friday and Monday. The Monday edition is just for paid subscribers. Last week, it had to do with caneberry discoloration, why blackberries, raspberries, brambleberries, and others are turning beige or white. Paid subscribers also have complete access to the previous posts of the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, and now there are over 200 editions of it. By the way, your paid subscription to the newsletter supports not only the ongoing efforts to produce the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter, but also helps keep the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast freely available each week. But everybody gets the Friday edition for free, and that's where we're going to be talking about what happened to all the ripe tomatoes. Find out more information about the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter in several places, including today's show notes, at our homepage, gardenbasics.net, or at farmerfred.com, or at Substack. And thank you for your support and encouragement to keep the good gardening conversation going. I'm looking at two different seed packets here. It's a packet of nasturtiums and a packet of snapdragon seeds. And on the nasturtium seeds, it says darkness aids germination, sow at the recommended depth. And on the snapdragon seeds, it says requires light for germination, press seed into the surface. That's confusing.
Yeah, different seeds need different environments. Most of them we cover them with 2 to 3 times depth of media as the narrowest part of the seed. Basically, very small seeds like lettuce don't get covered very deeply. Big seeds like, let's say, beans get covered more deeply. But there are the exceptions, and those are the ones that need light to germinate. And so it's just, again, part of their evolution. When they were produced in nature, they would land on the surface, and that would help them germinate. So it is worth definitely looking at the either depth of planting, surface might be one of those choices, or a comment on the packet that says needs light to germinate. If I have something that needs light to germinate, I worry a little bit about it drying out, because seeds sitting on the surface of anything, especially if they're outside in the garden, are exposed to air and heat and maybe
birds.
Wind and birds, right? So if they need light to germinate, then I will put a layer of vermiculite on top of them. Vermiculite is expanded mica. It looks like sort of gold foil. It's very shiny, and it has the ability to hold moisture because it's sort of accordion-like in its structure, in that there are layers of the rock and then open layers and layers of the rock and open layers. And so the water gets trapped in there. But it's so shiny that light will shine down on the seed. So you can cover, if you have a seed, with your snapdragon, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So if you have snapdragon seeds that say plant on the surface, You can lay them on the surface of the soil and put a layer of vermiculite on top. And that will allow the light to get to the seed as needed. And it will also keep moisture on the seed, which is absolutely needed for the seed to germinate. If birds are an issue, then you need some netting, wire, strawberry basket, something flat, maybe upside down over that area of the garden where you've put the seed so that the birds can't get into the seed and eat them. Or squirrels dig up the planter. I've had that happen a lot around here.
Looking at a packet for lettuce seed, it says keep soil evenly moist for best growth and thin regularly. Please explain evenly moist and thinning.
Well, evenly moist means it's not going to dry out ever. And that can be a challenge, especially if you live in a dry environment. Again, that's where I would employ covering on the soil surface like vermiculite. I also might use a sheet of newspaper over the top, just one sheet. And when that starts to dry out, you need to wet it again. It can be difficult. I would personally, living in the dry environment I live in, I would start those seeds indoors and put the seeds in a container, put the container either in a plastic bag or under a plastic dome, which you can get with a seed starting kit, so that it becomes very humid in there. And you can see water maybe dripping down the sides of the plastic bag or the sides of the dome. And then you know that the air has a lot of moisture in it, and that will help keep it evenly moist so that it never dries out.
And something that gardeners are loath to do, and that's thinning.
Yes, that's true. That was one of the most difficult things for me to get students to do. But I've got all these seeds. They all germinated. I want to grow them all. There are ways that you don't have to thin. If you started things in containers, you have lots of dexterity, yes, then you can work very gently with the root ball in water and try to separate them. And you can save more plants that way, more baby plants. But it's a lot of work. And typically, if they need thinning, then we've planted more than we have room for anyway. So thinning is done to give the plant room to grow. And if you do not give the plant enough room to grow, it will never produce. It will be crowded up against the other plants. You'll have increased disease problems, increased insect problems, and you will not get a satisfying crop. So you need to space the baby plants out so that they can grow and become mature plants. The beauty in some of the vegetable crops, like even carrots and lettuces, any of the greens, is that you can eat the ones that you take out of that you thin. But thinning typically should be done by cutting the plant off at the soil line.
Not yanking.
And not yanking, because if they're very close to the next plant, the roots could be entwined in each other, and you don't want to hurt the roots of the plant that you're going to keep.
Also on seed packets, you will generally see how far apart to space the plants for their eventual growth. In the case of this lettuce, it says 12 inches. But then it'll have a number for spacing of rows, and it's always different from spacing of plants. For instance, this says 12-inch plant spacing, but 15-inch row spacing. Why can't it all just be 12 inches?
Well, that's true. And in lettuce, I probably would put it 12 inches because lettuce can be harvested from the outside in, meaning as the plant matures, the leaves on the outside of the plant can be taken off and eaten. It will continue to make leaves in the center. In another kind of plant, I might say I would do it just 15 by 15. I always find that so confusing. I find two things confusing in the spacing of the plants. The one is they say plant them, let's say 2 inches apart, and then they say thin them to 12 inches apart. I always wonder, what's the point of that? If I'm using fresh seed packed for the year that I am planting in, by law, germination has to be very high. I don't know the number off the top of my head, or they have to put it on the packet. I think it's in the 90%. So I would expect that nearly every seed I put in the ground, assuming I plant it at the correct depth at the right season and keep it moist, evenly moist, will germinate. So why am I planting them every 2 inches if I've got to thin them to every foot? I'm a rebel in that department. I won't do that. I will plant them every 12 inches, but I might put 2 or 3 seeds fairly close together at that 12-inch spacing. And then my thinning is in that one location, thinning that down to just one plant.
Well, as long as you make the seed company happy and keep buying their seed, they'd probably agree with you on that.
Another point is that seed packets typically have way more seeds in them than we're going to use, unless your whole yard, Fred, is a garden.
Well, yeah.
But for those of us who are just planting for our regular consumption and as a hobby, we typically are only going to use a few seeds. So we can share seeds with other people. There are actually places, they might be libraries that are seed libraries, basically. That's a formal setup, but talk to your neighbors and see what they might want to grow and go in together and buy the seeds together. Or you save seeds from year to year, and in that case, you need to store them correctly, which is in a dry, cool place, which we were talking about in the refrigerator.
And generally speaking, seeds will keep, it really depends on the seed, but I think a ballpark figure might be 3 to 5 years.
Right. And typically the smaller the seed, the shorter it lives, the bigger the seed, the longer it lives. Subsequent years, I would choose to plant the bigger seeds. Sometimes you pour them out, let's say squash seeds, into your hand, and some are bigger and some are smaller. If I were using older seed, I would always use the bigger seed because it's got a better chance of having lived longer. And I would plant more. I would up the density of what I'm planting, assuming that some may not have survived from year to year. I used to do a seed germination experiment with my students where we took a paper towel, just a plain white paper towel, folded it in half, then unfolded it, put 10 seeds along that central crease, folded it in half again, then roll it up like a cigar so that the seeds are all at the top end of the cigar. Moisten the whole thing, put it in a plastic bag, and try to stand it up so that the seeds at the fold are up in the air and the rest of the paper towel is down below in a jar, let's say, and then cap it somehow. You can just put a plastic bag over the whole thing, or put the lid on the jar if it's a big enough jar, and then wait. And it says on the packet the days to emerge, so we would check it periodically, and if it was 7 days, take that paper towel cigar out, unroll it, unfold it, and count the number of seeds that have germinated. And I had a whole collection of old seeds. And I had some bean seeds that were more than 10 years old, and they continued to germinate at very high rates. So different seeds, other seeds, the students would get no results at all. So it very much depends on the different species.
Here's a pro tip for you if you are germinating seeds, and there are a lot of recommendations about germinating seeds ahead of time to make sure of doing exactly what you're suggesting is to determine the viability of a seed. Let's say you find this old seed packet, you take a portion of the seeds in that packet, you put it on a moist paper towel, you close it up, you keep it moist, and you see how many seeds germinate. The problem with paper towels is it's a fibrous material, and that new root that has developed could easily get tangled in those fibers. And so your choices are try to remove it carefully or plant it paper towel and all. The other option would be to use a non-fibrous substance to germinate seeds. And a perfect example would be a coffee filter.
Aha. Good advice. Yes, we had those sort of industrial paper towels at school that were somewhat less fibrous than the bumpy ones that we use at home. But students would often want to try to grow on the ones that had germinated. And so if they were stuck to the paper towel, we would just cut the ones out that had germinated and stick some paper towel and all into the media. But nice to know that a coffee filter makes that much easier.
I would like to reassure beginning gardeners when you have that new full seed packet and you start planting the entire packet, that's a habit that you never lose. That no matter how many years you garden, you're going to be trying to plant an entire packet of seeds. I just did that yesterday with a packet of snow peas. So I just went around looking for new places to plant snow pea seeds.
Well, and the other thing is that many gardeners do, and I'm one of those, is buy way more packets of seeds than they ever get around to planting. They're small, they're not really expensive, and they contain so much hope. It seems like such a positive thing to do. So I'm guilty of that one.
Well, we all are. We all have packets of seed. But I think the lesson is if you are a seed hoarder, hoard them properly in that cool, dry place. It could be under your bed is a cool, dry place, for example. Just be sure to label the package of what's there and put notes around to remind you that there's seeds under the bed. Don't store them in the garage.
Right. Don't store them or on a windowsill where light comes in and heats up whatever's nearby. Exactly. Yes.
Seeds are fun.
Oh, seeds are wonderful.
Yes.
Yes.
We sound like gardeners. Well, I think, of course, we have just scratched the surface of planting glossary terms. We'll probably revisit this again with more glossary terms, but I think we've learned a lot in our little diatribes here trying to explain seed packets, and I hope it helps out people.
Me too. Have fun. Seeds are so much fun.
Yeah, and once you get bit by the bug, you'll never go back.
True.
Yes. All right. It's Debbie Flower, and thanks for a few minutes of your time, Debbie.
Always a pleasure, Fred. Thank you.
Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Friday. Garden Basics is available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, as well as an accurate transcript of the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net. And thank you so much for listening and your support.